Poor black single mum drove her drunk billionaire boss home after the party. Now he reserves the seat beside him for her. You think because you pay my salary, you own me? Keisha's voice cut through the silence of the limousine like a blade. Her hand gripping the door handle as the billionaire slumped against the leather seat whispered the words that would change everything. Please, don't leave me like everyone else did. Before we get deep into today's story, I really want to know where you are watching from across the world. Please, drop in the comment section where you're watching. Hit the subscribe button if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy the story, because tomorrow, I have created something very special just for you, another beautiful story to share with you, and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Once again, welcome to Mr. Paul's Stories, where we come together like old friends, wrapped in the warmth of stories that light up our souls. Now, let's begin today's story. The pre-dawn silence of Detroit's east side was broken only by the distant hum of the I-94 and the soft shuffle of Keisha Washington's worn sneakers against cracked pavement. She pulled her jacket tighter as she walked toward the bus stop, her breath visible in the October air. At 28, she moved with the efficient grace of someone who had learned to make every step count, no energy wasted, no time lost. Her phone buzzed. Mama, Jalen won't eat his cereal. Says it tastes like cardboard. Keisha smiled despite the knot in her stomach. 12-year-old Jalen was growing pickier by the day, but they couldn't afford the name-brand cereals he saw in commercials. She typed back, "Tell him champions eat cardboard for breakfast. Makes them stronger. Love you both." The 5:47 a.m. bus to downtown Detroit was already crowded with other early risers, hospital workers, security guards, cleaning crews. People like her who worked while the rest of the world slept. Keisha found a seat near the back and pulled out her phone to review today's schedule. Corporate event at the Renaissance Center. High-profile clients. Which meant extra scrutiny. Extra pressure to be invisible. As the city's skyline came into view, she thought about the conversation she'd had with her mother the night before. "Baby, you're working yourself to the bone for people who don't even see you," her mama had said, worry creasing her weathered face. "When's the last time someone took care of you?" Keisha had laughed it off, but the words echoed now. When was the last time? She couldn't remember. 3 hours later and 280 miles away, Alexander Sterling stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office on the 45th floor of Manhattan's One World Trade Center. The city sprawled beneath him like a chessboard he'd been playing on for 15 years, every move calculated, every piece expendable. At 35, he commanded a tech empire worth $3.2 billion. But the reflection staring back at him looked hollow. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Sterling, the Detroit team has arrived for tonight's merger celebration. The venue is confirmed at the Renaissance Center's rooftop." Detroit. He hadn't been back since. Alexander pushed the thought away. Business was business. Geography was irrelevant. His phone displayed 17 missed calls from his father's estate lawyer. Another reminder that even death couldn't free him from family obligations. He let it ring. "Sir." His assistant's voice again. "Should I confirm your +1 for tonight?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "No +1, Margaret. I don't need an accessory." But as he said it, something twisted in his chest. The same emptiness that had been growing larger each year, each success, each lonely celebration. His therapist had called it achievement without attachment. Alexander called it Tuesday. The merger tonight would close a deal that would make him even richer. Another milestone, another hollow victory. He wondered, not for the first time, if this was all there was, an endless climb up a mountain with no view at the top. His reflection in the window looked back at him, successful and completely alone. What do you think drives someone to work tirelessly for people who barely acknowledge their existence? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear about the hardest workers in your life. The Renaissance Center's rooftop glittered like a jewel box against Detroit's skyline. Keisha moved through the crowd with practiced invisibility, her black uniform crisp, her silver serving tray balanced perfectly as she navigated between clusters of executives in $1,000 suits. The October wind carried the scent of Lake Huron and expensive cologne. She'd been working events like this for 3 years, ever since she'd gotten the job with Premier Catering Services. Good money, flexible hours, and most importantly, it let her be home for Jalen's bedtime. Tonight's merger celebration was bigger than usual. Sterling Tech's acquisition of Motor City Innovations had drawn power players from across the Midwest. Champagne, she offered to a group of men discussing stock options. They took glasses without looking at her face. Invisible, just how she preferred it at these things. That's when she saw him. Alexander Sterling stood alone near the railing, his tall frame silhouetted against the city lights. Even from across the rooftop, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he gripped his whiskey glass like an anchor. She'd served hundreds of wealthy men, but something about him was different. He looked lost. You see him too, huh? Keisha turned to find Marcus, one of the other servers, nodding toward Alexander. That's the big man himself. Alexander Sterling. Worth more money than God, but look at him. Drinking like the world's about to end. How much has he had? This is his 6th whiskey in 2 hours. Maybe 7th. Man's trying to drown something, that's for sure. Keisha watched as Alexander drained his glass and immediately signaled for another. His movements were still controlled, but she recognized the signs. Her father had been a functional alcoholic before he left. She knew what quiet desperation looked like. The party swirled around them, laughter, clinking glasses, the distant sound of jazz from the indoor reception. But Alexander remained an island of solitude, drinking methodically as if it were a business transaction. Someone should cut him off, Keisha murmured. Marcus snorted. Girl, you want to be the one to tell a billionaire he's had enough? That's how you get fired and blacklisted. But Keisha couldn't look away. There was something in Alexander's posture that reminded her of Jalen when he'd been bullied at school. Proud on the surface, crumbling underneath. 20 minutes later, the crowd had thinned. Alexander had moved to a corner table, his tie loosened, his usually perfect hair disheveled. His phone kept buzzing, but he ignored it. When he tried to stand for another drink, he swayed slightly. Keisha made her decision. She approached his table with a fresh glass of water and a small plate of bread. Mr. Sterling, I thought you might want something to eat. His eyes focused on her with difficulty. Up close, she could see they were gray-green, the color of stormy water. Beautiful and haunted. I didn't ask for food, he said, but his voice lacked its earlier authority. No, sir, you didn't. But sometimes we need things we don't ask for. He studied her face as if trying to solve a puzzle. What's your name? Keisha, sir. Keisha. He tested the name, his voice softer. You're not like the others. Sir. The others smile and nod and take my money. You're looking at me like I'm human. Something in his tone made her chest tight. She glanced around. The other staff were busy cleaning up. Management was nowhere in sight. She sat down across from him, a decision that could cost her job. You are human, Mr. Sterling. Money doesn't change that. He laughed, but it was bitter. Doesn't it? Sometimes I wonder if there's anything left of the person I used to be. What happened to that person? Alexander was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, he trusted the wrong people. Lost the only thing that mattered. Decided it was safer to stop feeling altogether. The vulnerability in his voice hit her unexpectedly. This wasn't the ruthless businessman from the magazines. This was someone drowning in plain sight. Feeling scary, she said quietly. But it's how we know we're alive. His eyes sharpened, focusing on her fully for the first time. And what makes you an expert on feeling, Keisha? Single mother working 3 jobs to keep my son fed and housed. Trust me, Mr. Sterling, I know about scary feelings. They sat in silence as the city sparkled below them. Finally, Alexander pushed his whiskey away, untouched. The party's over, he said, looking around at the nearly empty rooftop. Yes, sir. I can't drive. No, sir, you shouldn't. Another pause. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, I don't want to be alone tonight. The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. Keisha felt something shift in her chest, the same protective instinct she felt with Jalen. I can call you a car, Mr. Sterling. Alexander, he corrected. And I already sent my driver home. Didn't think I'd need. He gestured vaguely at himself. Keisha made another decision that would change everything. I can drive you home. He looked at her sharply. In what car? Yours. I assume you drove here. The black Tesla in the VIP section. He fumbled for his keys. But why would you? Because everyone deserves to get home safe. Alexander stared at her for a long moment. You don't know me. I could be dangerous. Keisha almost smiled. This broken man was about as dangerous as Jalen when he had a fever. Mr. Sterling, Alexander, the most dangerous thing about you right now is that you might fall asleep in this chair. For the first time all evening, he almost smiled. You're probably right. The elevator ride to the parking garage was quiet except for the soft hum of machinery and Alexander's unsteady breathing. He leaned against the wall, his eyes closed. Where do you live? Keisha asked as they reached his car. Grosse Pointe Shores. Lake Shore Drive. He handed her the keys, their fingers brushing briefly. His skin was warm despite the cool night. The Tesla was silent luxury incarnate, leather seats that probably cost more than her monthly rent, technology she'd only seen in movies. But as she started the engine and pulled out of the garage, all she could think about was the man beside her. Alexander had gone completely still, his head resting against the passenger window. For a moment she thought he'd fallen asleep, but then he spoke. My father died 3 weeks ago. The words hung in the air between them. I'm sorry, she said softly. I'm not. He was a bastard who cared more about money than people. But the funeral. His voice cracked slightly. I stood there watching them lower his coffin, and I realized I was looking at my future. Rich, successful, and completely alone. Keisha's hands tightened on the steering wheel. They were crossing the Ambassador Bridge now, the Detroit River glittering beneath them. You're not alone right now, she said. No, he agreed quietly. I'm not. The rest of the drive passed in comfortable silence. When they reached his estate, a sprawling modern masterpiece overlooking Lake Huron, Alexander made no move to get out. Keisha. Yes. Thank you. Not just for the ride. For seeing me. She turned to look at him fully. In the dim light from his porch, he looked younger, less guarded. We all need someone to see us sometimes. Will you? He started, then stopped. Never mind. It's inappropriate. What? I was going to ask if you'd like to come in. For coffee. Just. I don't want this feeling to end. The request was so honest, so devoid of manipulation, that it took her breath away. But reality crashed back. She was a single mother with responsibilities. He was her employer. This was already complicated enough. I should get back. My son will be wondering where I am. Of course. He looked embarrassed. I shouldn't have. Alexander. She waited until he met her eyes. This isn't about should or shouldn't. It's about timing. And maybe tonight isn't the right time. But maybe someday could be. The hope in his voice nearly undid her. Maybe someday. He smiled then, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him all evening. I'll hold on to that maybe. As she watched him walk to his front door, something had fundamentally shifted. She'd gone from invisible server to the woman who'd seen Alexander Sterling's hidden heart. And he'd gone from untouchable billionaire to someone who'd trusted her with his deepest loneliness. Neither of them realized it yet, but in the space of one evening, they'd found something they'd both stopped believing in: hope. Have you ever had a moment where showing kindness to someone completely changed both of your lives? Tell us about a time when human connection surprised you. See, the morning sky over Chicago's O'Hare Airport was steel gray, matching Alexander's mood as he stood in the VIP lounge, checking his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. Their flight to the tech conference had been delayed by 3 hours due to a storm system moving across the Midwest, and he was trapped in corporate purgatory with nowhere to retreat. Keisha sat across the lounge, laptop balanced on her knees, fielding calls about catering arrangements while simultaneously texting her mother about Jalen's parent-teacher conference. She'd been Alexander's executive assistant for exactly 47 days since Detroit, and they'd maintained a careful professional distance, polite, efficient, emotionally sterile. Mr. Sterling, she said, closing her laptop. The conference organizers are asking if we can push your keynote to tomorrow morning instead of tonight, given the delay. Alexander nodded curtly, but his eyes lingered on her face longer than necessary. Since that night in Detroit, he'd caught himself doing that, studying the way she concentrated when she worked, the gentle patience in her voice when she dealt with difficult vendors, the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from her even in mundane moments. Fine. Whatever keeps us on schedule. The announcement crackled overhead. All flights to Chicago are now canceled due to severe weather. Passengers are advised to seek overnight accommodations. Alexander's jaw tightened. Perfect. Keisha was already on her phone. I'll call the Palmer House. They usually have availability. Booked solid, Alexander said, hanging up his own call. Every decent hotel in the city is full. There's some medical conference and a Cubs playoff game tonight. The Marriott downtown might. Also full. They stared at each other across the suddenly quiet lounge. The storm outside pressed against the massive windows, turning the world into a blur of gray and white. There's a comfort in about 20 minutes out, Keisha offered hesitantly. Near the airport. It's not what you're used to. Alexander's pride warred with practicality. He'd stayed in 5-star suites across 6 continents, but right now, any bed would do. Book 2 rooms. 20 minutes later, standing in the cramped lobby of the Comfort Inn, Keisha hung up the desk phone with an apologetic expression. They only have 1 room left. The desk clerk says it's their last available room in a 50-mile radius. Alexander closed his eyes. Of course it is. I can sleep in the lobby, Keisha said quickly. The chairs look. Absolutely not. His response was sharper than intended. The thought of her spending the night on a lobby chair while he slept in comfort made something twist uncomfortably in his chest. We're both adults. We can manage 1 night. The room was exactly what Alexander had expected. 2 queen beds separated by a nightstand, generic artwork on the walls, and the faint smell of industrial carpet cleaner. But it was clean, and it was shelter, and for the first time since Detroit, they were alone together without the buffer of meetings and schedules. Keisha set her overnight bag on the bed nearest the door, maintaining the careful distance they'd cultivated. I'll just get ready for bed. Early morning tomorrow. But as she pulled out her phone to check messages, her face crumpled slightly. Everything okay? Alexander found himself asking, against his better judgment. Jalen's sick, she said, sinking onto the edge of her bed. Fever of 102. My mom took him to urgent care, but... She trailed off, clearly fighting the urge to elaborate. But you should be there. It wasn't a question. I'm here. Doing my job. Her voice was steady, but he could see the war playing out behind her eyes. Alexander loosened his tie, studying her profile in the lamplight. When I was 12, I had pneumonia. Spent 4 days in the hospital while my father closed a deal in Tokyo and my mother attended charity galas. Keisha looked up, surprised by the admission. The nurses were kind, but they weren't. He paused, the words catching. They weren't my mother. Kids need their mothers when they're scared. Mr. Sterling. Alexander. The correction came automatically. In a Comfort Inn in Chicago, I think we can use first names. A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Alexander. I can't just leave. This conference is important for the merger, and the merger will survive without one conference. Your son won't remember the business deal, but he'll remember whether his mother was there when he needed her. Keisha stared at him, and for a moment, the careful professional mask slipped. I can't afford to lose this job. You won't. You don't understand. Jobs like this, people like me don't get second chances in your world. One mistake, one absence, and I'm replaced by someone more reliable, more convenient, more what? The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to voice. More suitable, she finished quietly. Alexander felt something crack open in his chest. He sat on the edge of his own bed, facing her across the small space. Tell me about him. Your son. Why? Suspicion flickered in her eyes. Because in the past 7 weeks, you've managed my calendar, coordinated 3 major presentations, and probably prevented at least 2 diplomatic incidents with overseas clients. But I don't know anything about the person who makes all of that possible. Keisha was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, his name is Jalen. He's 12, thinks he's going to play for the Lakers someday, and he's terrified of thunderstorms. She glanced toward the window where lightning flickered. He'd be hiding under his blankets right now, probably making my mama tell him stories about when I was little. What stories would she tell? A genuine smile broke across Keisha's face. About how I used to collect bottle caps because I thought they were treasure. Built a whole fort in our backyard out of cardboard boxes and convinced the neighbor kids I was running a kingdom. The smile faded. Back when I believed the world was full of possibilities instead of limitations. What changed? Life. Pregnancy at 16. Baby daddy who disappeared when things got real. Parents who loved me but didn't have money for college. A world that told me I was lucky to get any job, let alone dream of better ones. Alexander found himself leaning forward. But you did dream of better. Still do sometimes. Late at night when Jalen's asleep and the bills are paid, I wonder what it would feel like to be someone whose opinion mattered. Someone who got listened to instead of just taking orders. Your opinion matters. She looked at him skeptically. Since when? The question caught him off guard because he realized she was right. In 7 weeks, he'd given her tasks, approved her solutions, relied on her competence, but he'd never actually asked what she thought about anything that mattered. Since now, he said quietly. Lightning flashed again, closer this time, followed by a crack of thunder that made them both jump. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely. In the sudden darkness, Alexander heard Keisha's sharp intake of breath. Generator should kick in, he said, but minutes passed in the strange intimacy of blackness and nothing happened. Jalen would be so scared right now, Keisha whispered, and Alexander heard the tremor in her voice that she'd been hiding. Without thinking, he stood and felt his way across the small space, guided by the sound of her breathing. Can I? Yes, she said before he could finish the question. He sat beside her on the bed, not touching but close enough to feel her warmth. Tell me more about the bottle cap kingdom. And in the darkness of a cheap hotel room during a storm in Chicago, Keisha Washington began to tell Alexander sterling stories that had nothing to do with profit margins or quarterly reports. Stories about a little girl who believed bottle caps were treasure and cardboard boxes were castles, who thought the world was vast and full of wonder. Alexander listened, really listened, for the first time in years. And somewhere between her description of bottle cap currency and cardboard diplomacy, he realized that the most valuable thing he'd ever heard wasn't a business proposal or market analysis. It was the sound of someone trusting him with the pieces of themselves they usually kept hidden. When the lights finally flickered back on 2 hours later, they were still sitting side by side in the darkness, talking like old friends who'd found each other again after too many years apart. I should call about Jalen, Keisha said softly. Yes, Alexander agreed, but neither of them moved. Because somewhere in the space between lightning strikes and shared stories, the careful distance they'd maintained had collapsed. And for the first time since Detroit, they both wondered what might happen if they stopped running from whatever was building between them. Have you ever been forced into an unexpected situation that completely changed how you saw someone? Sometimes our biggest breakthroughs happen when we're stuck with nowhere to hide. The Four Seasons Hotel in downtown Chicago felt like a fortress of marble and gold, but Keisha had never felt more exposed. 3 days into their extended business trip, she and Alexander had settled into an uneasy rhythm, professional during meetings, cautiously friendly during meals, and tonight, sharing drinks in his penthouse suite overlooking Lake Michigan. You don't have to stay, Alexander said, swirling his whiskey as rain pelted the floor-to-ceiling windows. I know this isn't normal. Keisha adjusted her position on the cream leather sofa, her work clothes feeling suddenly inappropriate in the luxury suite. Normal stopped existing the night I drove you home, Mr. Sterling. Alexander, he corrected softly. We're past formalities, don't you think? The name felt foreign on her tongue, too intimate. She had spent weeks rebuilding the walls between them, but here, 40 floors above the city, those walls felt paper-thin. Tell me about Detroit, Alexander said suddenly. Your real Detroit. Not the business districts or conference rooms. Keisha's fingers found the small gold cross at her neck, a gift from her grandmother. Why do you want to know? Because I grew up there too. The words hung in the air like a confession. Keisha set down her wine glass, studying his face. You're from Detroit? Alexander nodded, his gaze fixed on the storm outside. East Side. Warren Avenue. Before my father made his first million and decided we needed to disappear into Manhattan society. Warren Avenue. Keisha's voice was barely a whisper. I grew up on Mack Avenue, 2 miles from there. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implication. 2 kids from the same broken neighborhood, now sitting in a penthouse suite, one who had escaped, one who had stayed to fight. What happened? She asked. Alexander's jaw tightened. My mother left when I was 8. Packed a bag one Tuesday morning and never came back. My father found her note on the kitchen counter. I can't do this anymore. Don't look for me. Keisha felt her breath catch. She knew that kind of abandonment, had seen it in her own neighborhood too many times. I'm sorry. He threw everything he had into business after that. Said love was a luxury poor people couldn't afford, and he was done being poor. Alexander's laugh was bitter. Turns out he was half right. We got rich. But love, that stayed expensive. So you moved to New York. Penthouse on the Upper East Side. Private schools. Country clubs. He remade me into everything Detroit wasn't. Polished, proper, profitable. Alexander finally looked at her. But you can't really leave, can you? Not completely. Keisha understood. She had never left Detroit, but part of her had always wondered what would have happened if she had. Is that why you never came back? To the old neighborhood? I drove by our old house once. About 5 years ago. His voice grew quiet. Someone had boarded up the windows. The porch where my mother used to sit and wait for me to come home from school, it had collapsed. The image hit Keisha like a physical blow. She knew that kind of decay, had watched her own neighborhood crumble building by building, family by family. But she had also seen it fight back, seen communities rise from nothing because they had each other. My father left too, she said, surprising herself with the admission. When I was 16 and pregnant with Jalen. Alexander turned to face her fully. Keisha. He said I had embarrassed the family. That good girls don't end up teenage mothers. She traced the rim of her wine glass. My mama stood by me, but I could see the disappointment in her eyes. The worry about how we'd manage. But you did manage. Barely. Some nights I'd lie awake doing math in my head. Rent, utilities, groceries, Jalen's school supplies. The numbers never added up right, but somehow we made it work. She met his eyes. I learned to be invisible at work because invisible meant safe. Invisible meant they couldn't find reasons to let me go. Alexander leaned forward. You're not invisible to me. The words settled between them like a bridge neither had expected to build. Outside, thunder rolled across Lake Michigan, and for a moment, Keisha let herself imagine what it would be like to not carry everything alone. "There's something else," Alexander said, his voice rough. "About that night at the Renaissance Center." Keisha's heart quickened. "What about it?" "I wasn't just drunk. I was—" He struggled with the words. It was the anniversary. October 15th. The day she left. The pieces clicked into place. The way he had broken down in the car, the desperate way he had asked her not to leave. It hadn't been about the alcohol, it had been about the wound that never healed. Every year on that date, I tell myself I'm over it. That I've built something bigger than what she took from me. Alexander's hands clenched. But every year, I end up alone in some bar or at some party, trying to drink away the fact that I'm still that 8-year-old boy waiting for someone who's never coming home. Keisha felt tears prick her eyes. But I did come. That night I stayed. You stayed. The wonder in his voice was heartbreaking. Why? Because I know what it's like to be left, she said simply. And I know what it's like to feel like you're not worth staying for. They sat in silence, the storm raging outside while something quieter but more powerful settled between them inside. Two children from the same broken streets, finding their way back to each other through the maze of money and status and fear. "Keisha," Alexander said, his voice barely audible over the rain. "Yeah. What if we don't have to carry it alone anymore?" The question hung in the air like a promise neither was ready to make, but both desperately wanted to believe. In the reflection of the window, she could see them sitting together, not boss and employee, not rich and poor, just two people who understood the weight of being left behind. Have you ever met someone who understood your pain without you having to explain it? Tell us about the moment you realized you weren't alone anymore. For the first time since that night in the limousine, Keisha allowed herself to wonder if some things were worth the risk of hoping for. The cherry blossoms were in full bloom along the Potomac as Keisha stepped out of the Ritz-Carlton in Washington, D.C., the morning air carrying the sweet scent of spring renewal. It had been 3 weeks in Chicago, 3 weeks since Alexander had shared pieces of his broken childhood, 3 weeks since she'd started seeing past his billion-dollar armor to the man underneath. "You don't have to attend every session," Alexander said as they walked toward the Kennedy Center, where the Global Innovation Summit was being held. His voice carried that familiar note of protection, not condescension, but genuine care for her comfort. Some of these tech moguls can be intense. Keisha adjusted the strap of her new laptop bag, a business necessity Alexander had insisted on after seeing her taking notes on the back of receipts. "I've handled intense before, Mr. Sterling. Besides, someone needs to make sure you eat something other than coffee and ambition." He laughed, and the sound still surprised her, rich and unguarded. "Fair point. Though I notice you've stopped calling me sir in public. Would you prefer I go back to it?" she teased, then caught herself. The ease between them felt natural now, but it still scared her sometimes. How quickly the lines had blurred. God, no. His eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I prefer this. Whatever this is." The Kennedy Center's grand foyer buzzed with tech industry elite, venture capitalists, and media. Keisha recognized faces from Forbes covers, people whose decisions shaped global markets. A year ago, she would have felt invisible here. Today, walking beside Alexander, she felt seen. "Keisha," Alexander said quietly as they approached the registration desk, "I want you to know, you're not here as my assistant today. You're here because you belong here. Because your insights on user experience and market accessibility are sharper than half these people will ever be." Something warm unfurled in her chest. Alexander. Sterling, a booming voice interrupted. Senator Patricia Hawkins approached with her signature political smile. Good to see you. And this must be the brilliant woman everyone's been talking about. Keisha blinked. I'm sorry. Your presentation in Chicago made waves, the senator continued. Word travels fast in our circles. The way you broke down market barriers for underserved communities? Revolutionary. Alexander's hand found the small of Keisha's back, warm and steadying. Senator Hawkins, meet Keisha Washington. Though I suspect she needs no introduction from me. As the senator engaged Keisha in conversation about policy and innovation, Alexander stepped back slightly, watching. His expression held something she'd never seen before, pride, but not possessive pride. Pride in her, for her own achievements. Later, during the lunch break, they found themselves alone on the center's terrace overlooking the Potomac. The Washington Monument stood sentinel in the distance, and Keisha felt the weight of history around them, all the dreams that had been born and broken in this city. You were incredible in there, Alexander said, leaning against the railing beside her. The way you challenged that blockchain presentation? I've seen CEOs crumble under less pointed questions. Keisha smiled, but something nagged at her. Alexander, can I ask you something? Anything. Why me? The question tumbled out before she could stop it. I mean, really. You could have anyone, someone with an MBA, someone from your world. Why are you investing so much in this? In me. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the river below. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. Do you remember what you said to me that night in Chicago? In the hotel room when I was falling apart. She remembered. He'd been curled on the bathroom floor, shaking from memories of his father's abandonment, and she'd held him while he cried. You said, "You're not broken, Alexander. You're just scared of being whole." He turned to face her fully. No one had ever seen me that clearly. Not my therapists, not my business partners, certainly not anyone I dated. You saw past the money, past the success, past all the walls I'd built, and you saw me. Keisha's throat tightened. That's not an answer to my question. It's the only answer that matters. Alexander stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. I'm investing in you because you invested in me first. When you had no reason to. When I was nothing but your drunk, broken boss having a breakdown in a hotel room. You were never nothing, she whispered. Neither were you. His fingers found hers, intertwining gently. You want to know why you, Keisha? Because you're the first person who made me want to be worthy of something other than money. You make me want to be worthy of this. Of us. The word hung in the air between them, us. It felt dangerous and perfect and terrifying all at once. Alexander. She started, but he shook his head. I know. I know all the reasons this is complicated. The company, the media, the difference in our. Stop. Keisha pressed her fingers to his lips, silencing him. Don't you dare say the difference in our circumstances. Don't you dare make this about money. His eyes widened at the fierce protectiveness in her voice. This isn't about your billions or my student loans, she continued. This isn't about your penthouse or my 2-bedroom apartment. This is about the fact that you see me, really see me, and I see you. The real you. The one who stays up worried about employees' families during layoffs. The one who memorized my son's favorite books so you could send them signed copies. The one who learned to make pancakes because I mentioned missing weekend breakfasts with Jalen. Alexander's breath caught. You noticed. I notice everything about you, Alexander Sterling. The way you tap your pen 3 times before making big decisions. How you always order extra food at business dinners in case someone's still hungry. The way your whole face changes when you talk about the scholarship program you're secretly funding in Detroit. Keisha. I'm not done. Her voice grew stronger, more certain. You want to know why this works? Why this works? Because you make me braver. You make me believe I deserve more than just surviving. And maybe I make you believe you deserve more than just succeeding. The silence stretched between them, filled with cherry blossom petals drifting on the wind and the distant sound of the city. Alexander reached up, cupping her face with trembling hands. What are we doing, Keisha? She leaned into his touch, feeling the last of her walls crumble. We're falling in love. Finally, completely, terrifyingly in love. Is that okay? He whispered, his forehead touching hers. She thought of Jalen, of her mother's worried face, of all the obstacles that lay ahead. Then she thought of the way Alexander looked at her, not like she was something to be rescued or possessed, but like she was someone to be cherished and respected. It's more than okay, she breathed. It's everything. When he kissed her, soft and reverent under the DC sky, Keisha felt something she'd never felt before. Not just loved, but worthy of love. Not just seen, but celebrated. Not just surviving, but finally, beautifully alive. What do you believe is the most important ingredient for love to flourish between 2 people from different worlds? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective on what makes love transcend boundaries. Later that evening, they walked hand in hand along the Lincoln Memorial, the marble steps glowing white under the moonlight. Alexander had loosened his tie, his jacket slung over his shoulder, looking younger than she'd ever seen him. Jalen's been asking about you, Keisha said as they climbed the steps. He wants to know when Mr. Alexander is coming to dinner again. Alexander smiled. What did you tell him? That Mr. Alexander is very busy, but he cares about us very much. Cares is an understatement, Alexander said quietly. They'd reached the top of the steps, and he turned to look out over the reflecting pool, the Washington Monument mirrored in the still water. Keisha, I need you to know something. The seriousness in his voice made her pulse quicken. What? This isn't casual for me. This isn't some rich man's fascination with something different. This is, he struggled for words, then laughed at himself. I run a multi-billion-dollar company. I negotiate with world leaders. And I can't find the words to tell you that you've become the most important person in my life. Keisha's eyes filled with tears. Alexander. I love you, he said, the words rushing out like he'd been holding them back for weeks. I love your strength, your humor, your fierce protection of everyone you care about. I love the way you challenge me, the way you see possibilities I miss, the way you make me want to be better. I love that you call me on my nonsense and that you trust me with your fears. I love you, Keisha Washington, and I need you to know that before. Before what? His expression grew troubled. Before the real world intrudes. Before the board meetings and the media attention and all the complications that come with us being public. Keisha stepped closer, placing her hands on his chest. Are you having second thoughts? Never. The word came out fierce, definitive. But I'm scared I'll lose you to all the noise. All the pressure. Alexander Sterling, she said, echoing his earlier tone. I've survived poverty, single motherhood, working 3 jobs, and raising a teenager. I think I can handle some gossip columnists and stuffy board members. He laughed despite his worry. They're going to say terrible things. About both of us. About why we're together. Let them. Keisha's voice was steel-wrapped in silk. Let them question your motives and mine. Let them wonder if it's real. You know what I know. What? I know that love isn't diminished by other people's opinions. I know that what we have is built on respect, understanding, and genuine care. I know that you've never once made me feel like a conquest or a charity case. And I know that I'd rather face the world's judgment with you than face the world's approval without you. Alexander stared at her, wonder written across his features. How did I get so lucky? We both got lucky, she corrected. We found each other when we both needed finding. As they stood there, 2 silhouettes against the marble monument to freedom and equality, Keisha felt the truth of her own words settle in her bones. This wasn't just about falling in love, it was about rising together, lifting each other to heights neither could reach alone. So what happens now? Alexander asked, his arms encircling her. Keisha smiled, thinking of all the challenges ahead, all the joy, all the beautiful complexity of 2 lives becoming one story. Now we go home. All of us. You, me, and Jalen. We figure it out together. Together, Alexander repeated, like he was testing the word, finding it perfect. Together, she confirmed, and kissed him again under the stars, sealing a promise that would change everything. The Beverly Hills Hotel gleamed like a jewel against the California sunset, but inside the penthouse suite, Keisha felt like she was suffocating. 3 months had passed since Washington, D.C., 3 months of stolen moments, secret glances, and a love that had grown stronger with each passing day. But now, staring at the contract spread across Alexander's mahogany desk, she felt every dream they'd built together crumbling. You're selling the Detroit division? Her voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the sweet silence like a blade. Alexander didn't look up from his laptop. His fingers moved across the keys with mechanical precision, the same way he'd typed during those early days when she was just another employee. It's business, Keisha. Sterling Industries is consolidating operations. Business. She stepped closer, her hands trembling. Alex, that division employs 3,000 people. My neighbors. My community. People who will find other jobs. His voice was ice, the warmth she'd grown to love completely absent. This merger will increase efficiency by 40% and boost quarterly profits by. Stop. The word exploded from her chest. Just stop talking to me like I'm some stockholder in a boardroom. I'm Keisha. The woman who held you when you couldn't sleep. The woman who listens to your fears about your father's legacy. The woman you said you love. Alexander's hands stilled on the keyboard. For a moment, his mask slipped, and she saw the man she'd fallen for, vulnerable, scared, desperate for connection. But then his phone buzzed, and the walls slammed back into place. Ms. Washington, he said, and the formal address hit her like a physical blow. I need you to coordinate with the transition team. Ensure minimal disruption during the layoffs. Ms. Washington? She felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. That's what I am to you now? He finally looked at her, and what she saw in his gray eyes made her step backward. There was nothing there, no recognition, no warmth, no trace of the man who had whispered "I love you" against her skin just nights before. "You're my executive assistant," he said. "A very capable one. But let's not confuse professional excellence with personal feelings." The words hung in the air like poison. Keisha felt something vital inside her chest snap, a sound so loud she was surprised he couldn't hear it. "Professional excellence," she repeated slowly. "Is that what you call it when I stay up all night helping you prepare for board meetings? When I cancel my son's school events to travel with you? When I gave you my heart?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "No one asked you to do those things." "You did." Her voice cracked despite her efforts to stay strong. "Maybe not with words, but every time you reached for me in the dark. Every time you told me about your childhood. Every time you looked at me like I was the only person who could see the real you." "The real me is a businessman, Keisha. This," he gestured between them, "was a mistake. A distraction I can't afford." She laughed, but it sounded like breaking glass. "A distraction? That's what 3 months means to you. What I mean to you." Alexander stood from his desk, moving to the window that overlooked Rodeo Drive. His reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, cold, untouchable, everything she'd fallen in love with him for not being. "My father built this company from nothing," he said, his voice distant. "When he died, he left me one instruction: never let emotion compromise profit. I forgot that rule with you. It won't happen again." "Your father was a lonely, bitter man who died alone," Keisha shot back, anger finally overriding her heartbreak. "Is that really the legacy you want?" Alexander whirled around, his eyes flashing with fury. "Don't you dare." "What?" "Tell you the truth." She stepped toward him, her fear evaporating in the face of his pain. "Your father's wisdom is why you can't sleep at night. Why you drink yourself numb after every business dinner. Why you sabotage every relationship before it can hurt you." "That's enough." His voice was deadly quiet. "No, it's not enough. Because I see what you're doing, Alex. You're scared. Terrified that if you choose me, choose us, you might actually be happy. And happiness feels like betraying him." Alexander's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You don't know what you're talking about. I know you better than anyone." She was crying now, but she didn't care. "I know you count ceiling tiles when you can't sleep. I know you donate anonymously to children's hospitals because of the brother you lost. I know you keep your father's watch but never wear it because it reminds you of every time he chose business over you." "Stop." The word came out strangled. "I know you love me," she whispered. "And that's what's destroying you." For a heartbeat, his mask cracked completely. She saw the broken boy he'd been, the man he could become, the love he was killing to protect himself. But then his phone rang, shrill and demanding, and Alexander Sterling, billionaire, CEO, emotional fortress, picked up the call. "Sterling," he answered, turning his back to her. Keisha stood there, watching the man she loved choose fear over hope, money over meaning, loneliness over love. When he began discussing stock prices and merger timelines as if she wasn't even in the room, she quietly gathered her things. "I'll submit my resignation in the morning," she said to his back. He didn't respond, didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge that she'd spoken at all. But she saw his shoulders tense, saw his free hand grip the window frame until his knuckles went white. At the door, she paused. "For what it's worth, Alex, Your father was wrong. Love isn't weakness. Fear is. And right now, you're the weakest man I've ever known." She left him there, silhouetted against the Los Angeles skyline, surrounded by everything money could buy and nothing that mattered. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like the end of everything. In the hallway, Keisha finally let herself break. She slid down the wall, her professional composure crumbling as sobs racked her body. 3 months of believing in fairy tales, of thinking love could bridge any gap, of hoping she was enough to heal his wounds, all of it shattered against the reality of his fear. Have you ever watched someone you love choose their wounds over their healing? Sometimes the people we care about most are their own worst enemies. What would you do in Keisha's position? Her phone buzzed with a text from Jalen. "Mom, when are you coming home? I miss you." Home. Detroit. Reality. A life where she mattered, where she was seen, where she didn't have to compete with ghosts for love. Keisha wiped her tears, stood up, and walked toward the elevator. Behind the penthouse door, she could still hear Alexander's voice discussing profit margins, the same mechanical tone he'd used to dismiss their love. She didn't look back. The November rain hammered against the windows of Alexander's penthouse office as he stared at the legal documents spread across his mahogany desk. 3 weeks had passed since Los Angeles. 3 weeks since he'd watched Keisha walk away from him at Alex, her eyes filled with the pain he'd put there. The merger papers blurred before him as his mind replayed that moment for the 1,000th time. "Mr. Sterling." Margaret's voice cut through his reverie. "The Detroit team is requesting final approval on the venue change." Detroit. Everything came back to Detroit. Alexander's hands trembled as he reached for his coffee cup, a tremor that had started the day after Keisha left and hadn't stopped. His doctor called it stress. Alexander knew better. It was the physical manifestation of a heart trying to beat around a hole the size of her absence. "Sir." "Cancel it," he said quietly. "Cancel the venue change. Cancel everything. The celebration, the press conference, all of it." Alexander stood, his chair rolling back against the glass wall. "I need to make a call." Margaret's eyebrows shot up. In 15 years, Alexander Sterling had never canceled a victory lap. "Should I reschedule?" No. Alexander was already reaching for his phone. Some things are more important than business. The dial tone stretched endlessly before her familiar voice answered. "Mama Washington Childcare, this is Keisha." Her professional tone cut through him like glass. He'd heard her laugh, whisper his name in the dark, cry against his shoulder, but this polite stranger's voice was worse than silence. Keisha. Her name felt like coming home and falling off a cliff simultaneously. The pause stretched between them, filled with everything they'd said and everything they hadn't. Alexander. Her voice softened just slightly, and he closed his eyes at the sound. "You shouldn't be calling me." "I know. But I need to tell you something." He walked to his window, looking out at the city that had been his kingdom but never his home. "I fired him." "What?" "James Patterson. My CFO. The one who leaked your background to the press." Alexander's reflection stared back at him, and for the first time in weeks, he didn't look away. "He's been embezzling from the Detroit Community Development Fund. Thought he could hide behind his accusations about you to cover his tracks." Silence. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you were right. About everything." Alexander pressed his forehead against the cool glass. I did choose my reputation over you. I let fear make me cruel. And I've spent every day since wishing I could take it back. Alexander. I love you. The words came out raw, desperate. I know I hurt you. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But I had to tell you that. I love you and Jalen, and the way you make mac and cheese from a box like it's a 5-star meal. I love how you fall asleep reading bedtime stories, and how you argue with the news anchors when they say something stupid. I love that you see me, really see me, not just the money or the power, but the man who's been pretending he doesn't need anyone for so long he almost forgot how to be human. He could hear her breathing, soft and uneven. I've spent 3 weeks trying to convince myself I could go back to before. Before you. Before I knew what it felt like to wake up next to someone who loved me for me. But I can't unknow that feeling, Keisha. I can't unlive those moments when you looked at me like I was worth loving just as I am. You hurt me. Her voice broke on the words. In front of everyone. You made me feel like I was nothing again. I know. God, I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life making up for it if you'll let me. Alexander's free hand clenched into a fist against the glass. I was scared. Terrified that everyone would see what I saw, that I didn't deserve you. That a woman who raised an incredible son on her own, who works 3 jobs and still has energy to laugh at terrible movies, who sees the best in people even when they disappoint her, that someone that amazing could never really love someone like me. Someone like you? Broken. Empty. A man who measures his worth in zeros on a bank statement because he never learned any other way to count. The words came easier now, like lancing a wound. My father left when I was 8. Said I wasn't worth staying for. My mother spent the rest of her life trying to fill that hole with other men who always left too. I learned early that love was conditional, temporary. That if people really knew me, they'd leave. So you left first. I left first. The admission felt like stepping off a ledge. But I don't want to run anymore, Keisha. I want to fight for this. For us. I want to prove that I can be the man you believed I could be. The silence stretched so long Alexander wondered if she'd hung up. What are you asking me, Alexander? Everything. Nothing. A chance to prove that love could conquer the voices in his head that whispered he wasn't worth staying for. I'm asking you to let me try again. Not as your boss, not as someone who thinks he can buy forgiveness, but as a man who loves you and wants to spend every day earning the right to be in your life. Alexander's voice cracked. I'm asking you to believe that people can change. That I can change. Another pause. Then, I have to think about this. Of course. Take all the time you need. Alexander closed his eyes, already missing the sound of her voice. But Keisha, whether you give me another chance or not, I need you to know something. That night at the Renaissance Center, when you drove me home, you saved me. Not just from drunk driving, but from a life of sleepwalking through my own existence. You woke me up. And even if I never see you again, I'll never stop being grateful for that gift. Alexander. I love you. And if love is enough, if it can bridge the gap between who I was and who I want to be, then I'll spend every day proving it. But if it's not, I'll understand. You deserve someone who chooses you first, every time. I just hope it's not too late for that someone to be me. Alexander ended the call before she could respond, his hands shaking as he set the phone down. Through the rain-streaked windows, New York City glittered like a circuit board, all lights and no warmth. For the first time since building his empire, it felt small. He had laid his heart bare. Now all he could do was wait. The choice was hers. But for the first time in his life, Alexander Sterling had chosen love over fear. Whatever happened next, that had to count for something. Across the city, in his empty penthouse that had never felt like home, he sat in the silence and waited for the woman who had shown him what home could feel like to decide if he was worth the risk. The rain continued to fall, washing the city clean, preparing it for whatever would come next. 6 months later, the golden hour light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Renaissance Center's executive boardroom, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany table. Keisha stood at the same spot where she'd first served champagne to indifferent executives 6 months ago, but everything had changed. She wore a tailored navy dress, not a uniform, and her name placard read Keisha Washington, Director of Community Outreach. Alexander entered the room, his eyes immediately finding hers across the space. Even after all these months, her presence still took his breath away. He'd flown in from Manhattan that morning, but Detroit felt more like home now than any penthouse ever had. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, addressing the board of Sterling Industries' newest acquisition, "before we conclude today's quarterly review, I want to share something that's transformed not just our company, but our understanding of what success actually means." Keisha felt her heart flutter as he gestured toward her. This was the moment they'd planned, but somehow it felt even more significant than she'd imagined. 6 months ago, I stood on the rooftop of this very building, drunk on champagne and empty achievements, Alexander continued, his voice carrying a vulnerability that would have been impossible before. I thought success was measured in zeros on a balance sheet. I was wrong. He paused, his gaze holding Keisha's. True success is measured in the lives we touch, the communities we lift, and the love we allow into our carefully guarded hearts. The boardroom was silent, hanging on every word. "Ms. Washington didn't just drive me home that night," Alexander said, his voice growing stronger. "She drove me toward becoming the man I was meant to be. Today, I'm announcing our partnership in the Sterling Washington Foundation, dedicated to providing educational opportunities for single parents across Detroit, Chicago, and beyond." Applause erupted around the table, but Keisha barely heard it. All she could see was Alexander's smile, the real one, not the corporate mask he used to wear. This was the man who'd held her son Jalen at his first basketball game, who'd learned to make pancakes from scratch because champions don't eat cardboard, who'd spent hours helping with homework at her kitchen table. After the meeting, they walked together toward the same rooftop where it all began. The Detroit skyline sparkled in the distance, the city lights reflecting off the river like scattered diamonds. "Do you remember what you asked me that night?" Alexander said softly, stopping at the exact spot where she'd found him broken and alone. Keisha smiled, remembering. "I asked if you had somewhere safe to go." "And now?" he asked, turning to face her fully. "Now I know," she whispered, "safe isn't a place. It's a person." Alexander reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Keisha's breath caught as he dropped to one knee, right there on the rooftop where their story began. "Keisha Washington," he said, his voice trembling with emotion, "you saved me in every way a person can be saved. You showed me that love isn't about having enough, it's about giving everything. Will you let me reserve the seat beside me for the rest of our lives?" The ring caught the last rays of sunlight, a simple, perfect solitaire that somehow captured all the light in the world. "Yes," she breathed, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Alexander. Always yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, The city lights began to twinkle below them. From this height, Detroit looked magical, full of possibility and promise. "I have something for you too," Keisha said, reaching into her purse. She pulled out a small wrapped package, her hands shaking slightly. Alexander opened it carefully, revealing a silver keychain with 2 charms, a small heart engraved with home, and a tiny bus, worn smooth from handling. "It's from my old keychain," she explained. "The bus I rode to get here to you. And home, because wherever we are together, that's home." Alexander's eyes filled with tears as he attached it to his keys, right beside the key to the penthouse that had never felt like home until she'd filled it with laughter and love and the sound of Jalen's feet running down marble hallways. They held each other as the stars appeared one by one over Detroit, the city that had brought them together humming with life below. "So what happens now?" Keisha asked, her head resting against his chest. Alexander smiled, thinking of the plans they'd made, the foundation, the wedding they'd have right here in Detroit, the life they'd build together. But more than that, he thought of tomorrow morning, waking up beside her, of Jalen calling him Dad, of board meetings where she sat beside him as an equal partner, not in the shadows but in the light. "Now," he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, "we go home. Together." As they walked toward the elevator, Alexander's phone buzzed with a text from Jalen. "Mom, tell Mr. Alexander the first made the honor roll. Can we celebrate with pizza?" Keisha showed him the message, and Alexander laughed, the deep, genuine laugh that had replaced his hollow corporate chuckle. "Pizza it is," he said, typing back, "Proud of you, son. Pizza and ice cream. Champions deserve both." The elevator doors closed around them, carrying them down from the heights where they'd found each other, toward the street level where real life waited. But they weren't the same people who'd ridden this elevator 6 months ago. She, invisible and overlooked. He, successful but empty. Now they were partners, equals, 2 souls who'd found their home in each other. As they stepped out into the Detroit night, Alexander took her hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. The seat beside him, in boardrooms, at family dinners, in life itself, would always be hers. Reserved for love. Looking back on their journey, what do you think was the moment that truly changed everything for them? Was it that vulnerable night on the rooftop, or was it one of the quieter moments in between? Share your thoughts. Love often grows in the spaces between the grand gestures.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you love this story, you will surely enjoy the next one. It's crazier and more intriguing as you can never imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.